winter Tobias Rennick turned 14. He started planting thorns, not flowers, not a garden. Thorns, long, whip-thin cuttings of hawthorn and blackthorn and Osage orange that he carried home in bundles wrapped in wet burlap and pressed into the frozen ground in a ring around the henhouse on his family's place in Perry County, Tennessee. He worked before school and after school, and through most of 2 Saturdays in a row. He wore his father's old gloves and still came in bleeding. His mother asked him once what he was doing. He said he was planting a fence. She looked at the sticks, bare and gray, and no thicker than a pencil, and said nothing more about it. Nobody in Perry County laughed out loud. They were too polite for that. But they thought it. A boy planting shrubs around a chicken coop in January. Decorative, somebody called it at the feed store, and the word went around the way words do. He did not explain himself. Not to his father. Not to his brother. Not to the neighbors who slowed their trucks at the end of the lane to look. He just kept planting. 2 winters later, when the coyotes came down out of the ridge in numbers nobody in that county had seen before, every single person who had smiled at those thorn sticks would remember them very differently. If stories of patience, hard-earned wisdom, and rural life mean something to you, subscribe and join our farming family. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We would love to know how far these stories travel. Perry County sits in the middle of Tennessee, where the land stops being flat and starts remembering that it used to be hills. Creeks cut through it in every direction. Hardwood ridges rise up steep behind the pastures, thick with oak and hickory, and the kind of undergrowth that hides whatever wants hiding. The Rennicks had farmed 160 acres there since 1921. Cattle mostly, some hay, and a laying flock that Marlene Rennick had built up over 11 years into something close to 200 birds. The eggs went to a co-op in Linden and to 3 restaurants over in Hohenwald, and in a lean year, that egg money was the difference between a hard winter and a bad one. Tobias was the younger of 2 sons. His brother Dewey was 17, loud and capable and good with an engine. Their father, Kel Rennick, was a fence and cattle man, deliberate, sparing with praise, sparing with criticism, sparing with most things. Tobias was the quiet one. He was the one who walked the tree line at dusk for no reason anybody could name. He was the one who found the calf down in the draw before the buzzards did. He was the one who noticed, that autumn, that the deer had stopped bedding in the low pasture and moved uphill. He did not say anything about it. He watched, and he filed it away. The henhouse sat 60 yards from the barn at the edge of the field, where the ground began to rise toward the ridge. Kel had wrapped it in welded wire when he built it, and had patched that wire every year since. It worked well enough. Losses were normal. A hen here, a hen there, and once in a while a bad week where something got under the wire and took 4 or 5 and left what it did not eat. Everybody accepted that. It was the cost of keeping birds within sight of a wooded ridge. Everybody except Tobias. The idea did not come from him. It came from a woman named Esther Lovelace, who lived alone in a house at the top of Dobbins Road, and who had been born on that same hill in 1938. Tobias had been helping her stack firewood for $2 an hour the summer he was 13. Her property had a hedge around the kitchen garden, an old one, gnarled and knotted, and grown so thick together that it looked less like plants and more like architecture. He asked her about it. She looked at it a long time before she answered. My grandfather set that in 1944. Hawthorn and blackthorn, laid over and woven while it was young. She reached out and knocked her knuckles against it, and it did not move. Nothing has ever gotten through it. Not a dog, not a fox, not a deer. Wire rusts. Wire gets pushed under. That does not. She told him how it was done. You plant the cuttings close, 6 or 8 inches apart. You let them take root for 2 seasons. Then you cut most of the way through each stem near the base. Bend it over at an angle and weave it through the uprights while it is still living. The plant does not die. It sends up new growth from the wound and from the base. Vertical shoots through a horizontal frame, and every year it knits tighter into itself. She called it laying a hedge. She said her grandfather had called it the same thing, and his father before him, and that it came over from England with people who had never owned a single roll of wire in their lives. She gave him a booklet, cheap paper, stapled, put out by an agricultural extension office that had probably closed before he was born. He read it 4 times. What Esther Lovelace described is real, and it is older than most of what we call modern agriculture. A laid hedge is a living barrier. Hawthorn and blackthorn carry thorns that run 1 to 2 inches long and grow at every angle, and because the plants are bent and interwoven rather than simply planted in a line, the mature hedge has no gap at ground level. That is the part that matters. Wire fence has a bottom edge. Everything that hunts a chicken knows how to find a bottom edge and dig beneath it. A properly laid hedge does not have one. The base is the densest part. It is a wall of thorn and root and stem all the way to the dirt. And no coyote alive is going to push through 2 feet of it for a bird when there is an easier bird half a mile away. Tobias understood this the way a boy who walks tree lines understands things. Not as theory, as something that would matter later. He planted in January of that first winter roughly 400 cuttings, hawthorn and blackthorn, and a run of Osage orange along the uphill side where the pressure would be worst. Most of it came from the fence rows on his own place and Esther's. He paid for the rest with hay-hauling money. The first year nearly killed the whole thing. A March freeze took maybe 70 of the cuttings outright. Rabbits stripped the bark off another 30 at the base in a bad stretch of late winter, and by the time he found the damage, those plants were finished. He cut fresh whips and replanted every gap and hauled water to the new ones through a dry June. 5-gallon buckets, 2 at a time, 60 yards downhill and 60 yards back. Dewey watched him do it one evening and said what most people were thinking. You know, Dad already fenced that. Tobias kept walking with his buckets. In the second summer, deer found the young hedge and browsed the tender growth along the north face down to nothing. He built a low, temporary wire barrier to protect his living one, which he understood was funny and which he did not find funny at the time. Kel Rennick never told his son to stop. He also never told him to keep going. He watched from the barn lot, and once when he saw the boy struggling to bend a stubborn blackthorn without snapping it clean, he walked over, held the stem steady with one gloved hand, and walked back without a word. The laying began the following spring, when the plants were 2 years old and thick as a man's thumb. Tobias worked with a billhook Esther gave him, cutting each stem 3/4 through near the ground, bending it over, weaving it through stakes he had driven every yard. It took him most of 2 months. His hands healed and tore and healed again. By that autumn, the ring around the henhouse was not a row of shrubs. It was a hedge, 4 feet high, 3 feet thick at the base, and so densely woven that you could not see daylight through it. The coyotes came in the winter. He turned 16. It was not one animal. It was a hard year in the hills. Mast crop failed, rabbits scarce, and something pushed them down off the ridge and out into the pastures in a way people talked about for years afterward. Beau Trammell, who ran a small flock 2 miles south, lost 31 birds in a single night in early February. The wire had been dug under in 2 places. Whatever came through did not stop when it was full. The Kesslers lost their entire brood of turkeys and a barn cat. Old Farron Doak, who had kept chickens for 50 years and had never once lost more than a hen at a time, came out on a Sunday morning to find his coop open and 11 birds gone and 8 more dead in the yard. He stood in that yard a long while. Then he went inside and did not come back out that day. At the Rennick place, they heard them. Kel stood on the porch at 2 in the morning with a light and listened to the yipping move along the tree line and down into the low pasture and toward the henhouse, and then heard it stop and mill and circle, and after a while heard it move on toward the creek. In the morning, the hens were in the henhouse, all of them. The ground outside the hedge was churned with tracks. They had walked the entire circumference. They had dug at the base in 3 places, and the digging had gone 4 or 5 inches down into a mat of hawthorn root and stopped. There were tufts of gray hair caught in the thorns at knee height, where something had tried to force a shoulder through and thought better of it. Nothing had gotten in. Nothing was ever going to get in. Farron Doak came over the following week. He was 78 years old, and he had lost 19 birds, and he did not say much when he got there. He walked the whole hedge slowly, all the way around, the way a man walks a thing he is trying to understand. He put his hand on it once and pushed. It did not move. He looked at Tobias for a while. "How long?" he asked. 3 years. Farron nodded slowly. He looked back at the hedge. "I've got 3 years," he said. That spring, he planted. So did Beau Trammell. So did the Kesslers, and a family over on Cedar Branch that nobody had even told. And by the time Tobias Rennick was 20 there, were laid hedges going in around hen houses all over that end of the county. Nobody called a meeting. Nobody wrote it up. It moved the way useful things move on working land. Quietly, from one man's fence line to the next, in the season after somebody got hurt. Esther Lovelace lived to see it. She told him once, standing at the edge of his hedge, with her hand resting on the top of it, that her grandfather would have understood exactly what he had done, and would not have said a word about it either. Wendell Berry wrote that the care of the earth is our most ancient and most worthy, and after all, our most pleasing responsibility. Tobias Rennick was not trying to be wise. He was trying to keep 200 hens alive in a place where the ridge came down close to the barn, and always had. He had listened to an old woman who knew something, and he had believed her enough to spend 3 years bleeding for a fence made out of sticks, while everyone he knew thought it was for looks. The hedge is still there. It is taller now, and it is thicker every year, and it will still be standing when the wire has rusted through and been replaced twice over. That is not a metaphor. That is simply what a hedge does when you lay it properly. Have you ever built something slow that other people thought was foolish? Tell us about it in the comments. We read every one. And if this story meant something to you, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from.